The door slammed behind me, and there it was. My life, my memories, all scattered across the yard like garbage. Still, I didn't move. Her words. It's trash. Cutting deeper than I expected. As her anger burned, I gripped the broken suitcase in my hand, the leather worn from years of sacrifice. While the neighbors watched, I steadied myself, the scent of fresh-cut grass mixing with the bitterness of betrayal. The same love I'd given her now felt like a distant echo. That's when I realized the mother-daughter bond wasn't hers to discard. This time, I was in charge. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Jane pulled up to the house, her heart thudding in her chest, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. The driveway was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any noise. She had returned early from the business trip, eager to check in on Olivia, who, despite everything, was still her daughter, and get back to some semblance of normalcy. But as Jane stepped out of the car, something felt wrong. Her eyes scanned the front yard, and a cold chill ran down her back. At first, she couldn't make sense of it. Then it hit her. Her things, her personal things, scattered across the lawn as though they were nothing more than trash. Her old leather briefcase, the one she'd carried for years, sat torn open by the garden gnome. A stack of books she had meant to donate, flung carelessly beside the mailbox. Her favorite potted plants, those she'd spent weeks tending to, now lay smashed, their soil and broken petals creating a dark stain on the freshly manicured grass. The sight was surreal. It was as if the world around her had suddenly shattered into jagged fragments of what she thought was her life. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. The rage bubbled up inside her like a slow burn, but she swallowed it, pushed it back. She wasn't going to let herself fall apart here, not in front of the neighbors. She turned toward the front door, her breath shallow, but as soon as she raised her hand to knock, Olivia's voice cracked through the air, sharp and cutting. "I'm done." Jane froze. She'd heard her daughter angry before, but never like this. The venom in Olivia's tone was unmistakable. Olivia stood at the door, her hair wild, her face flushed with fury. Jane could see the tremor in her hands, the tightening around her jaw. It wasn't just the mess in the yard. This wasn't about the broken plants or the discarded things. This was about something deeper, something that had festered for too long. Jane opened her mouth to speak, but Olivia didn't give her a chance. "This shit," she gestured broadly toward the yard, "is trash. You're trash." The words landed on Jane like a slap, ringing louder than any insult ever could. Trash. Jane's things, her life, were trash to her own daughter. She felt a sting, sharp and unrelenting, but she stayed still, her feet planted firmly on the ground. She had to be strong. "I don't owe you anything," Olivia continued, her voice cracking with the weight of her anger. "Not after everything. I'm done." And just like that, Olivia slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the window pane, the sound echoing in the hollow space between them. Jane stood there, motionless, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality unfolding before her. The neighbors were watching, she realized suddenly, standing across the street in their pristine, picture-perfect homes. She could feel their eyes on her. She could feel the judgment, the quiet whispers that always followed her, always would. The rage inside her burned hotter, faster. She wanted to shout, to scream at Olivia, to demand an explanation, to throw every word she had ever held back in her daughter's face. But there was nothing. Only the dead, suffocating silence of the suburban street, the soft hum of sprinklers turning on in the distance. She glanced at the yard again, at the broken remnants of her life scattered carelessly, and something in her snapped. No more. No more pretending. No more swallowing her anger. No more being the one who took it all. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with something deeper, something darker. Quiet rage, the kind that had been building for years, now rippling through her veins like wildfire. She wasn't going to beg for Olivia's love, not anymore. She wasn't going to beg for anything. Jane turned on her heel and walked away, her steps slow but deliberate. Every movement was an act of restraint. The rage was there, simmering beneath her skin, but she would not give Olivia the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She made her way to the driveway, her heart heavy, the sound of each footfall muffled against the cold concrete. The door to the house was still closed, Olivia still inside, hidden behind the walls of her own self-righteousness. She reached her car and paused for a moment. Her hands shook as she gripped the door handle. But she didn't turn around. Not this time. She wouldn't let Olivia see her break. As Jane pulled out of the driveway and drove away, her gaze never strayed from the rearview mirror. The house, the yard, the life she'd built. It all seemed so far away now. And Olivia? She was still inside, her rage and her pride keeping her locked in a prison of her own making. But Jane would make sure she'd have to face the consequences. The rage would fuel her. It would drive her forward, beyond the yard that had become her grave. And when the time came, Olivia would learn who was truly in charge. The dim, amber glow of the bar in Pasadena felt worlds away from the chaos Jane had left behind. The hum of quiet conversations and the clink of glasses felt surreal in comparison to the storm raging inside her. She took a seat at the far corner, her back against the wall, eyes scanning the room for Rachel. Rachel had chosen this place for a reason, far enough from Jane's usual circles, quiet enough for their conversation to remain undisturbed. As Jane waited, she replayed the events of the past few hours in her mind. The yard, Olivia's venomous words, the sharp sting of betrayal that lingered long after the door slammed shut. But now, there was no time to linger in those emotions. It was time to do something. When Rachel entered, her presence seemed to cut through the noise of the bar. She was composed, as always. Her dark, tailored coat a stark contrast to the warmth of the place. Rachel's eyes scanned the room for a moment, sharp and calculating, before she walked toward Jane with a purposeful stride. She didn't smile. She never smiled when things were serious. "Jane," she said, her voice low and controlled as she slid into the seat across from her. "I know what you're thinking." Jane raised an eyebrow, her lips tight. "Then let's hear it." Rachel leaned forward, placing a thin file on the table between them. Her fingers tapped against it, deliberate, almost rhythmic. "Olivia doesn't know it yet, but she's about to lose everything." Jane's heart skipped, but she didn't let it show. "I'm listening." Rachel's eyes glinted with something cold, something almost predatory. "We're going to take her apart piece by piece. It won't be fast. It'll be surgical. Every move will hit where it hurts the most. Her company, her reputation, the image she's built of herself. She won't even see it coming." Jane felt a cold rush of satisfaction at the words. Finally, someone who understood the depths of her anger. Someone who could turn this into something real. Rachel continued, her voice calm but precise. "First, we hit her business. That's where her real obsession lies. We'll create a scandal, a controlled leak. Nothing too obvious, but enough to make her clients start to question her integrity." She paused, meeting Jane's eyes. "That will destabilize everything. When her investors pull out, she'll have nothing left." Jane's pulse quickened at the thought of Olivia's empire crumbling, and yet, it felt too easy, too simple. She leaned forward, her voice steady, though a current of sharpness ran through it. "What's next?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Next? We take away her mask. Olivia thrives on being the perfect daughter, the perfect businesswoman, the perfect image. But we'll peel that away. We'll expose her weaknesses, her lies, her petty cruelties. We'll let the world see her as she truly is. Jane nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. You're sure about this? She asked, a hint of vulnerability breaking through. Because once we start, there's no going back. Rachel's gaze softened just for a moment before it turned steely again. You don't need to look back. She's burned too many bridges. You're just lighting the match. Jane took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was no longer just about Olivia's disrespect. This was about showing her what it felt like to be stripped bare, to lose everything she thought she had control over. She looked Rachel dead in the eye and said, in a voice colder than she'd ever heard herself speak, "Don't hold back." Rachel didn't flinch. "I won't." There was a long, quiet pause as Jane's words settled between them. She could feel the weight of it, the enormity of what they were about to set in motion. But there was no turning back. This was the only way forward. Then, Rachel slid another folder toward Jane, a dark smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I've already made the connections. David Monroe is eager to help you." At the mention of David's name, Jane's heart skipped a beat. David Monroe, her old rival. The one who'd nearly destroyed everything she'd built in the corporate world before he'd been pushed out. Largely thanks to her. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but she knew one thing. He had a vendetta against Olivia's company. And now, that vendetta could work in their favor. Jane didn't hesitate. She looked at Rachel, her gaze hardening. "Get him involved, now." Rachel smiled. A wicked gleam in her eye. "Done. He's already itching to take her down." "Then let's make sure it's the most public, most painful fall she's ever experienced." As Rachel scribbled a few notes on the back of a napkin, Jane's mind raced ahead. The pieces were falling into place. But this wasn't just about Olivia's professional life. This was about power. About taking back what had been stolen from her over the years. It wasn't enough for Olivia to simply lose. She needed to feel the weight of every moment Jane had endured, every word unsaid, every bruise hidden beneath the surface. Rachel slid the napkin across the table, a plan outlined in concise strokes. Jane took it, her fingers gripping the edges. She looked at it, then at Rachel, and a dark sense of anticipation started to crawl beneath her skin. It would be slow. It would be ruthless. And in the end, Olivia would understand. This was just the beginning. The first drop came quietly, barely noticeable at first. A small email notification from Olivia's assistant, a simple line of text. "Client X has decided to pull out of the deal." It was one of those vague corporate things that could mean 100 different reasons, but Olivia knew better. It was the first ripple. By midday, another notification. This one had a subject line that made her stomach twist. "Client Y withdraws from the partnership." A heavier blow, but still nothing concrete. Nothing that screamed disaster. But something inside her clicked. Something was wrong. When Olivia logged onto her dashboard and saw the sharp drop in the company's revenue, it hit like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a bad day. This was the beginning of something bigger. The cracks were widening. Her business partner, Sarah, was the first to approach her. The woman was no stranger to tension. They'd clashed before, but this time it was different. There was an accusation in Sarah's eyes when she entered Olivia's office. "You've been leaking confidential data, haven't you?" she demanded, voice tight with fury. Olivia's jaw dropped. "What? What are you talking about?" Sarah slammed a folder onto the desk, pages spilling out in a chaotic mess. The emails, the leaked documents, the financial records. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was proof. "You don't even realize the damage you're doing, do you?" Sarah hissed, her eyes wild with frustration. "Your damn ego is costing us everything, and now this." Olivia stood up, her chair scraping violently across the floor. "I'm not," she began, but her voice faltered, the words suddenly feeling hollow. She had no explanation, not a convincing one. Not anymore. Sarah's gaze softened just slightly, but it only made the accusation sting more. Don't you ever do this again. If I find out you're behind any of this, I'm out. The door slammed shut behind Sarah as Olivia stood there, frozen in place, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. Leaking confidential data? The accusation hung in the air, twisting like a noose. Who could have done this? Her own paranoia flared, and the familiar, suffocating anxiety wrapped around her chest. Chris called later that afternoon. His voice was calm, like it always was when he tried to calm her down. Olivia, it's going to be fine. We'll sort this out. You're doing great. Just breathe. But Olivia didn't want to breathe. She wanted answers. No, I'm not fine. They're trying to destroy me, Chris. I can't breathe. I can't. I can't let this go. She hung up on him before he could say another word, her mind spiraling, every thought turning into a sharp, jagged edge. As the hours passed, Olivia's anxiety spread like an infection. Every ping on her phone felt like another threat. Her mind raced between the loss of clients, Sarah's accusations, and Chris's unreadable silence. She had been doing everything right, hadn't she? She'd worked harder than anyone, fought for her company with everything she had. And now, it was all slipping away. The pieces didn't fit, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was playing her, pushing her closer to the edge. That night, after a restless evening spent scrolling through her phone, Olivia couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at her. She knew she had to control the narrative. She opened her Instagram, her fingers trembling as she tapped the screen. A carefully crafted post was born from the chaos inside her. A teary-eyed selfie, a plea for support. She captioned it, "The truth will come out soon. Stay strong. Stay with me." It was a moment of pure desperation disguised as strength. The response came in waves. Some messages were supportive, others not so much. But one stood out. Among the flood of comments, one simple message caught Olivia's eye. "Careful with what you say. Someone's already been talking to the press." Her breath caught in her throat. A chill spread across her skin as she looked through her messages, but nothing stood out. No one had direct proof, at least she thought. No one had connected the dots, right? But the seed of doubt was planted deep. Olivia sat still, watching the notifications flood in, the realization creeping like a shadow at the edges of her mind. Across town, in the dim glow of her laptop screen, Jane watched it all unfold, her expression unreadable as she scrolled through Olivia's Instagram story. She had expected the meltdown, the signs of unraveling. But watching it happen, seeing the exact moments she had set in motion, was like watching a fire slowly consume everything in its path. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen for a moment before she clicked on the news outlet's tip line page. "I have information about questionable financial practices at a growing startup. If you're interested, contact me." She hit send, her hand trembling slightly. No turning back now. Olivia's world was about to fracture. Jane knew it, and she knew the next move had to be as quiet and precise as the one before it. Back at Olivia's office, the second bombshell dropped. 2 employees, ones she'd worked closely with for months, were fired on the spot for betrayal. No proof, no warning, just accusations. But to Olivia, it didn't matter. She couldn't allow anyone else to weaken her position. As she watched them pack up their things, her heart thudded painfully in her chest, but the satisfaction of pulling the trigger gave her a cold sense of power. They were the cracks in her empire, and she needed to close them before anyone else noticed. But as Olivia dismissed them, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming for her. A storm. One she had no control over. And Jane? She just leaned back, watching from the shadows, waiting for the storm to break wide open. The air was thick with the kind of tension that made Jane's skin prickle with anticipation. She sat at a small corner table in a coffee shop just down the street from Olivia's office, her laptop open in front of her. The city buzzed around her, but in this moment, there was only the screen. Her thumb hovered over the send button, her mind steady, her thoughts sharp. The documents, carefully compiled over the past few weeks, were ready to be unleashed. Private emails from Olivia, the ones where her true self had slipped through the cracks. The ones where Olivia had insulted clients, belittled team members, and shown a level of arrogance that made Jane's stomach churn. It's time. She clicked send, and the email shot out into the ether, bound for several influential journalists and social media accounts. The first tweet hit a few minutes later, a screenshot of Olivia's caustic words, accompanied by a blistering caption. Exclusive. Olivia Parker's shocking emails reveal the true face behind the startup empire. SAC exposed. It was like setting a match to dry kindling. Within hours, the fire spread. Retweets, shares, and reposts flooded social media. The screenshots, those carefully curated, venomous messages, popped up in news feeds and media outlets across the country. The backlash was immediate. Sponsors who had once touted their relationship with Olivia's company pulled their funding. In light of recent revelations, they said, we can no longer stand by a business led by someone with such an appalling lack of professionalism. The words stung, but Jane couldn't help the cold satisfaction that ran through her veins. Every bit of this was necessary. This was how Olivia would learn. Across town, Olivia's phone buzzed relentlessly. The notifications kept coming. Her phone, her email, her social media, all a blur of anger and betrayal. Her mind spun as she scrolled through the posts, each one cutting deeper than the last. How could this be happening? She had been careful, hadn't she? She thought she had everything under control. But now? The internet was a storm, and she was the eye of it. Her first instinct was to deny, to bury her head in the sand and hope it would blow over. But the storm didn't work like that. The comments came flooding in. Disgusted followers, former colleagues, outraged clients all taking to social media to weigh in. Every post seemed like a public execution, every tweet a final blow to her reputation. In the middle of this frenzy, Chris called. His voice was tight, no longer calm and reassuring, but tinged with a rising panic. Olivia, what the hell is going on? The emails. How could you let this happen? Olivia gripped her phone so hard her knuckles turned white. How could this happen? She was being torn apart by the very empire she had built. Chris, I didn't do this, she stammered. But she could hear the doubt in his voice. Then how do you explain this? He demanded, his frustration boiling over. These emails. You're ripping apart your own team, your own clients. You can't just lie your way out of this. The lie was already coming out of her mouth before she had time to think, the words tumbling out with a desperate, shaky quality. I don't know who did this. Someone's framing me. It's not what it looks like. You have to believe me. But even as she said the words, a part of her knew it was too late. Chris wasn't buying it. His silence on the other end of the line was enough. Then, a click, followed by the harsh dial tone. Olivia threw her phone across the room, the weight of it sinking into her chest. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and inside, her office was a war zone. The protest started an hour later. It wasn't large, but the sight of former employees and disgruntled clients gathering outside her office building felt like an omen. There was no longer any hiding. The cracks in her foundation were now fissures, spreading wide and swallowing her whole. The protesters carried signs chanting, "Truth over lies, no more abuse." Olivia stood at her office window, staring out at the chaos, the noise of the protest muffled by the thick glass. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was nothing left to fight with. No more lies to tell. No more people to manipulate. The world had seen her now, the real her. And it wasn't pretty. Back across the street, Jane sipped her coffee slowly, her gaze never leaving the office building. She could see the small crowd outside now, her plan taking shape like a masterpiece in motion. The protesters were only the beginning. The email leaks, the public outcry, Chris's distrust. This was the unraveling. She allowed herself a brief smile. Olivia had been right about one thing. The truth would come out. And as Jane watched the chaos unfold, she felt a wave of something powerful rising inside her. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was something darker, something colder. She'd watched the facade of Olivia's empire crumble, but there was still more to be done. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the final stage. The destruction had only just begun. And Olivia wouldn't even know who had made her fall. The house felt emptier now, quieter. Olivia hadn't left her office for days, consumed by the flood of anger and resentment that seemed to pulse through her like a beating heart. The protests outside had faded, but the venom from the online world still lingered like smoke. She stared at her phone, watching as the comments on her last post continued to roll in. Some called her a liar, some said she deserved everything she was getting. But the worst ones were the whispers that followed her everywhere, the accusations of being unstable, of being unfit to lead. It stung. It gnawed at her core, a constant, suffocating reminder of everything she had lost. But Olivia wasn't done. Not yet. The private investigator she'd hired had come through, delivering a file thick with details on Jane's life. Everything was in there. Her career, her relationships, her triumphs and failures. But it was the personal stuff that stood out. Her failed marriages, the strain in her relationship with Olivia when she was younger. There was something fragile, something deeply human about the truth in those pages. And in Olivia's mind, it was the key to turning the tide. That evening, she published a blog post, a direct attack on Jane's character. Emotional abuse, the dark side of the woman who raised me. The title itself felt like a punch to the gut. She recounted every memory, every slight, every time Jane had made her feel small or ignored. She painted her mother as the manipulative force behind the cold ambition that had shaped Olivia's life, a woman who had twisted her affection into a weapon. This isn't about a mother's love, it's about control. Olivia's fingers trembled as she hit publish, but she felt a rush of vindication too. Finally, the world would see Jane for who she really was. She expected retaliation, expected Jane to crumble under the weight of the accusations, to beg for sympathy, to apologize for the mistakes of the past. But that's not what happened. Instead, Jane went silent. The day after Olivia's blog post went live, Rachel called Jane, her voice low with concern. "You need to stay out of it. Let her bury herself. Don't respond. Silence is your best weapon now." But Jane didn't listen. She wasn't the type to cower. Not anymore. And she wasn't going to let Olivia dictate the narrative. Instead of hiding, Jane sat down at her desk in the quiet of her home office, staring at her computer screen. There was a calmness in her eyes, a deliberate poise. The words she wrote next were measured but sharp, like a scalpel cutting through the flesh of a lie. She clicked send on the open letter. "Olivia, you have a way with words. I should give you credit for that. But the truth is, I've spent my life giving you everything I could. The love, the sacrifices, the hours spent trying to give you what I never had. So don't think for a second that I'm not hurt by your words. But I'm not going to sit here and let you twist the truth." The letter detailed everything: Olivia's childhood, the strained relationships, but also the moments of love, of genuine connection. She wrote about the pain of raising a daughter who had never understood the sacrifices made for her, the emotional toll it had taken on Jane's spirit. But it wasn't just about her side of the story. It was about showing Olivia, and the world, that Jane wasn't the villain. Olivia had been. And that, ultimately, was what hurt the most. You want the truth? You want me to admit to something? Here it is. I've been more than a mother to you. I've been a human being. And now, for the first time in your life, you'll see who I really am. Not the monster you've made me out to be. Not the broken woman you think you know. The woman who's tired of being silenced. She hit publish, and the letter, composed with quiet fury, began to spread. Within hours, the internet responded, not as Olivia had hoped, but as Jane had expected. Support flooded in from unexpected places. Former colleagues, clients who had worked with her for years, even people who had followed Olivia's career, now questioning her character. Comments poured in, ones that started with sympathy and moved toward outrage. She raised you, Olivia, and this is how you repay her? I've worked with Jane for years. She's always been professional. Olivia, you've crossed a line. The tide was turning, and it was turning in Jane's favor. Olivia's post began to backfire. What was supposed to be a declaration of war turned into her own public execution. The rumors of Olivia's instability grew. Journalists picked up on the growing sentiment, painting her as the victim of her own self-destructive lies. The narrative was shifting, and it wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Olivia's phone buzzed again. Chris. Olivia, we need to talk, he said, his voice steady but strained. You've got to stop this. This isn't you. You've crossed a line. Olivia clenched her fist around the phone, the frustration building again. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Everyone had turned on her. The world was watching her unravel. But Jane was standing tall, unshaken. And Olivia? She was sinking, caught in the flood of her own mistakes. Her mind raced, and as the weight of her isolation pressed in on her, she realized something with a sickening clarity. Jane wasn't done with her. The worst was yet to come. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, its incessant vibrating only adding to the tightness in Olivia's chest. She reached out blindly, eyes still blurry from the alcohol, and squinted at the screen. A notification, another message, another call. But it all felt distant, too far away for her to care about. She'd been up for hours, maybe days. Time didn't make sense anymore. The swirling mess in her head felt like static. The comments, the news stories, the constant reminders that everything she had worked for was falling apart. The weight of it all was crushing. Her company, her reputation, her life. Everything was slipping away, faster than she could grasp it. She dragged herself out of bed and stumbled into the kitchen. The cool, sterile light of the refrigerator cast long shadows on the walls. It was empty. The alcohol bottles, though, were very much full. She grabbed the nearest one, uncapping it with a practiced flick of the wrist, and took a long, unsteady swig. The burn didn't feel like it used to. It was dull, a numbness that only echoed the one in her soul. Olivia had tried to maintain control, tried to keep everything running, to project an image of strength. But behind closed doors, it was all slipping through her fingers. The panic attacks had started again, the ones that she could never quite shake. The pressure, the loneliness. Every part of her screamed to just make it stop. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Her heart skipped when she saw the name on the screen. Chris. She knew what he would say. He'd been avoiding her for days now, like everyone else. But this time, maybe this time, he'd come through. Maybe he'd say something that would make it stop. She answered, voice hoarse from disuse. Chris, I can't do this anymore. Everything's falling apart. I don't know who I am anymore. But the voice that responded wasn't what she expected. It wasn't Chris. It was Rachel. I thought you'd be better than this. Rachel's voice came through the phone, cool and detached. You can't just keep drowning in it. You've made your bed, Olivia. Olivia's hand shook as she gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? People are talking. You've lost control. If you don't pull yourself together, if you don't stop this mess, your board's going to vote to suspend you. Rachel continued, her voice colder now. Your investors are gone. And now this HR complaints? This former intern is talking. Do you even hear yourself? A former intern. Olivia's blood ran cold. Someone from inside? Someone who knew too much? Who is it? Olivia demanded, panic creeping into her voice. But Rachel had already hung up, leaving her with the hollow ringing in her ears. Olivia felt her body go numb. The walls closed in, her breath shallow. The thing that had been creeping at the edges of her mind, the thing that had always been her fear, was finally here. She was no longer the predator. She was the prey. The night dragged on, and Olivia's thoughts twisted. Her fingers hovered over her phone, her mind racing. She couldn't let this happen. Not like this. So she did what she always did when the pressure got too much. She went live. She needed to reclaim the narrative, needed to remind everyone who she was. Her face appeared on screen, pale, eyes red-rimmed but determined. She was a woman on fire, about to scorch the world with her words. Listen up, she began, voice trembling but loud. You all want to know the truth? Fine. I'm not perfect. But I didn't deserve this. You think you know me, but you don't. This is the reality. The real story. You want to talk about abuse? You think you know what I've been through? She paused, the anger rising, the words slipping out faster than she could stop. I was raised by a monster, a woman who cared more about her career than her own child. She ranted for several minutes, the fury behind her words raw and uncontrollable. Every accusation, every insult, spilled out in a deluge of hurt. But as the minutes passed, the anger slowly morphed into something else. Desperation. She began to stammer, to fumble. Her facade cracked in real time. The viewers were silent, watching the unraveling in front of them. Some cheered, some whispered their doubts. The comments flooded the screen faster than Olivia could read them. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the inevitable collapse. It wasn't strength anymore. It was just a show. A pathetic attempt to hold on to something that was already lost. When she finally ended the live stream, her hands were shaking. The screen went black, but the feeling didn't leave her. The world had seen her, broken, desperate, and it wasn't going to let her forget it. Across the city, Jane watched it all unfold from her phone. Olivia's live video, her rant, her breakdown. It was the final confirmation. Everything had been set into motion. And Olivia? She had shown her true face to the world. Jane stood up from her desk, walking toward the window, her reflection merging with the darkening city skyline. She knew what had to come next. The final phase was about to begin. Her phone buzzed again. Olivia had tried to call her. Jane looked at the screen for a moment, her thumb hovering over the call button, but she didn't answer. Not yet. Olivia's voice was a distant echo, a reminder that the battle was far from over, but Jane had already won. The end was near, and it would come when Olivia least expected it. The envelope was thick, heavy, and crisp. Olivia stared at it for what felt like an eternity before she finally picked it up. It was one of those moments that felt like it could break her, but she had already been broken 1,000 times before. She knew who it was from, of course. The stark, professional handwriting. The signature that she hadn't seen in years. Her mother, Jane. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope, the paper inside smooth and cold, like the silence that had surrounded them for so long. As she unfolded it, the weight of what was inside felt like a burden she couldn't bear. The words were raw, surgical, cold, but deliberate, every sentence carved with precision. Each word felt like a needle poking through her skin, drawing blood. Olivia, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I've spent my life making sure you had everything you needed, everything you thought you deserved. You were my daughter, and I gave you everything. But somewhere along the way, you turned it all into venom, and now I have to live with the consequences of my own mistakes. Olivia's vision blurred, but she forced herself to read on. She didn't want to face the truth, but the weight of it pulled her in. I sacrificed everything for you, Olivia. My career, my dreams, my very soul. And you turned it all into something I can't recognize. You blame me for everything, but this is your doing. You chose this path. You chose the hatred, the lies, the cruelty. I gave you everything, but you wanted more. More than I had to give. Her hands shook violently as she gripped the paper. The tears came before she realized it, her breath shallow as she gasped for air. But it wasn't pity she felt. It was something worse. A hollow, sinking feeling that crawled into her chest, colder than the winter air that always seemed to linger in her mother's house. I don't want you to die, Olivia. I want you to feel what it's like to be erased, to be forgotten. I want you to know what it feels like to have nothing, to know that you can never go back. Because this is who you are now. You've burned every bridge you've crossed, and I'm the one left holding the ashes. The letter continued, but Olivia couldn't read it anymore. Her eyes darted to the table where documents spilled out. Screenshots, emails, records she hadn't noticed before. They were neatly arranged, a testament to how carefully Jane had planned her revenge. The pieces of her downfall, her unraveling, had been orchestrated by Jane. Every client lost, every employee fired, every leak exposed. It had all been mapped out, calculated, and she had fallen into every trap. She had been the pawn in a game that Jane had been playing for years, and now it was all laid bare in front of her. Olivia's chest tightened, a sob ripping through her throat as she collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The sound of the paper crumpling beneath her fingers was the only thing that filled the room. She felt the weight of the world settle on her shoulders, the unbearable weight of everything she had lost. The woman she had tried to paint as a monster had made her pay for every ounce of pain she had caused. She looked around the room, at the broken photo frames on the floor, the shattered remnants of a family that never really was. The bills, unopened, ignored, lay scattered like the broken pieces of her life. Olivia curled into herself, her body trembling, as if the shock had just now hit her. Every single thing had been taken from her. Her company, her reputation, her relationships. And now, her mother had wiped away the last vestiges of hope she'd clung to. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the letter, burn it, erase it all. But it was too late. Jane had already won. Her mind screamed for answers, for someone to blame. She had blamed Jane for everything, everything. She had believed she was the victim. But now, for the first time, Olivia could see the truth staring back at her. She wasn't the victim. She was the villain. The one who had taken, never given. The one who had burned every bridge and destroyed every relationship that had mattered. Olivia's sobs turned to quiet gasps, the realization crashing over her like a wave. She had nothing left. No business, no family, no love, and now, no future. The letter had done its work. It had cut deeper than any wound Olivia had ever felt, and Jane wasn't done yet. There was still more to come, still more to lose. As Olivia lay on the cold kitchen floor, the final remnants of her empire slipping away, she knew it wasn't over. Jane would finish what she had started, and there would be no going back. This was her reckoning. And Olivia? She was already gone. The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence of Jane's apartment like a sharp knife. She'd known this moment was coming, had anticipated it. But even so, the weight of it nearly knocked her breath from her chest. Olivia. For a moment, Jane stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the answer button. It felt as if the universe had paused for a brief second, holding its breath. The sound of Olivia's name echoed in her head, the reminder of all that had led to this moment, the lies, the cruelty, the betrayal, the years of silence. And yet, despite everything, Jane still felt a pulse of something, a question lingering in the air. Did she want this? Did she really want to hear what Olivia had to say? She answered the call, but she didn't say a word. She just waited. On the other end, Olivia's voice cracked immediately, raw with desperation. "Mom, please, I need to talk to you. I need to see you. Can we, can we meet?" The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Jane could hear the tremor in Olivia's voice, the quiet crack that had begun to form in her carefully constructed shell. It was familiar, that desperation. She'd heard it before, the same voice that once begged for her love, for her approval. But now, it wasn't a plea for affection. It was a plea for help. Olivia continued, voice trembling. "I don't know who I am anymore. Everything's falling apart. I've lost everything. I just, I need you to hear me out." For a long time, Jane didn't respond. She let the silence settle, stretching longer than necessary. She could hear Olivia's breath, ragged on the other end. It wasn't just the sound of her breaking. It was the sound of everything Olivia had built crumbling. And Jane? She felt nothing but a slow, steady pulse of finality. Finally, she spoke. "I'll meet you, but only in public. Somewhere neutral." She could feel the weight of her words settling in her chest. "You don't deserve the comfort of my home." The agreement was made, the terms simple and final. Olivia didn't argue. Jane could almost hear her relief. The weight of expectation that had been building between them for so long finally given a chance to slip away. The diner they met at was quiet, tucked in a corner of the city where the lights were dim and the world felt far away. The atmosphere was thick with the lingering scent of coffee and the soft clink of dishes. A place where stories were shared, but nothing was truly remembered. Perfect for what was about to unfold. Olivia sat across from Jane, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The woman she once was seemed to have melted away, leaving only the shadow of who she had become. Her hands fidgeted on the table, restless, unable to find any comfort in the sterile, bland surroundings. She looked like a ghost, a version of herself she didn't even recognize. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jane let Olivia collect herself, let her find the words that had been evading her for so long, but Jane wasn't in a rush. Not anymore. She had no more patience for Olivia's excuses, no more time for apologies that would never come. "I don't know what happened," Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She was looking down, avoiding Jane's gaze, as if she could somehow hide from the truth in her hands. I thought I could do this. On my own. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Jane's gaze was cold, calculating. She didn't feel sympathy for the woman in front of her. She'd given Olivia everything she had, and what had it led to? A broken, angry daughter who had turned everything Jane had given her into poison. "What made you think you could treat me like garbage and not pay for it?" Jane's voice was steady, a blade wrapped in velvet. Olivia's shoulders slumped, her gaze falling to the table as her hands twisted together, almost pleading for the comfort of silence. "I thought you were weak," she whispered. I thought you would always take it, the way you always did." The way you let me treat you." The words fell between them like a heavy stone, and for the first time, Jane felt a flicker of something almost like pity. Not for Olivia, but for the woman she had allowed herself to become. The woman who could never see the cost of her actions until it was too late. "You thought I was weak?" Jane repeated, her voice colder now. The air around them had thickened, grown heavy with everything unspoken. "I let you take everything from me. I let you take pieces of my soul, of my time, of my love. And now, you're sitting here, begging me for forgiveness, when you never even understood what I gave." Olivia flinched, a slight tremor running through her frame. She looked up at Jane, her expression broken, the last remnants of the confident facade she once wore shattering completely. "I was wrong. Please, just tell me what to do. I'll fix it. I'll fix everything." Jane's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but only for a moment. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. As she gathered her things, she pulled something from her bag, a small envelope, and placed it in front of Olivia. "What's this?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking again as she glanced down at the sealed envelope. "Your receipt," Jane said, her words dripping with finality. "For your therapy bill. It's the least I can do for you now." And with that, Jane turned away, walking out of the diner without another word. Olivia sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope. The weight of it crushed her, but she knew there was nothing left to fix. She had been given everything: love, forgiveness, a chance. But now, in the empty silence of the diner, she understood. It was over. The sun had barely begun to rise when Olivia stepped out onto the quiet street, her new reality pressing down on her like the weight of the morning fog. It had been months since the fallout, since the last of her pride had crumbled and her world had turned to ash. Now, in this strange, unfamiliar silence, Olivia was starting again. She moved like a shadow, quiet, unnoticed, as if trying to erase herself from the echoes of her past. No one knew where she was or what she was doing. Her social media accounts had gone dark. The blog posts, the Instagram updates, the online image she'd so carefully crafted, gone. She'd learned the hard way that the public eye was unforgiving. It saw only what it wanted to see. And now, the silence had become her refuge. The PR firm was small, tiny, even. An old building nestled between rundown shops and empty storefronts, a place that didn't care about who you were or what you had been. A place where she could be someone else, someone nameless. Olivia Parker was gone. The woman who had once walked into boardrooms with her head held high, the woman who had been consumed with ambition, had left with all her pride. She now existed in the shadows, hiding beneath the unassuming name she had chosen, Claire Turner. A new identity. A blank slate. The work was mundane: press releases, client lists, and media kits. But it was a quiet kind of dignity. No one questioned her. No one asked about her past. She wasn't Olivia Parker, the founder of a failed startup. She was Claire Turner, a no-nonsense PR consultant trying to make ends meet. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt a small, strange peace. Still, every night, after the office had emptied out and the office lights flickered off, Olivia found herself staring at her phone. It felt like an extension of herself, yet she no longer knew how to hold it. The constant pull to check social media, to scroll through the world's reactions, had diminished, but there was still a lingering pull to know if anyone was talking about her. And sometimes, when the loneliness became too much, she would search Jane's name. She had to know. But Jane hadn't posted. No updates, no news, no public displays of anger or vengeance. Olivia could feel her absence like a cold draft under the door. Jane was watching from a distance, but she was quiet now. She was done. And Olivia was free. Across town, Jane sat in her study, her fingers resting on the edge of her keyboard, staring at the blank screen in front of her. She had watched Olivia's every move over the past few months, but it was different now. Quiet. Unremarkable. Olivia had fallen into the shadows, a woman who had once filled the room with noise, now fading into the background. Jane had expected this, the slow, painful retreat of someone who had nothing left to prove. But there was something else that nagged at Jane. She had watched Olivia slip into this quiet corner of the world without saying a word, without breaking. Jane could see the exhaustion in the lines of her face, even in the few public appearances Olivia had made. And yet, there was something else there. A shift. A flicker of the woman Jane used to know, a part of her that had been buried beneath the facade of success and ambition. Maybe Olivia was changing, or maybe she was just running. One day, as Jane sipped her coffee, the phone rang. It was Chris. He had been calling more frequently, a hesitant voice on the other end of the line, asking how she was, if she was okay. He hadn't reached out in a while. Not since everything had exploded. It wasn't an apology, Chris never apologized, but there was something in his voice now that made Jane's chest tighten. "I heard about Olivia," he said after some hesitant small talk. I think she's trying to pull herself together. She's working at some PR firm now, under a different name, but I recognize her. She's Claire Turner," Jane interrupted, her voice measured, calm. Chris hesitated before responding. "Yeah, that's it. She's trying to make a living, I guess." "I don't know what to make of it, Jane. I just thought you should know." "I know," Jane said softly, her eyes fixed on the view outside her window, the city stretching before her, endless and indifferent. "I've been watching." Chris's voice grew quieter. "You don't think she's trying to, I don't know, come back? Make things right?" Jane didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure what to say. Olivia had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. The world didn't care about redemption. It never had. Rachel's voice echoed in Jane's head, the warning clear. "If you open the door, be sure she's not holding a knife." Jane didn't trust Olivia. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the door had already been cracked. And somewhere, in the silent spaces between her thoughts, Jane couldn't help but wonder if Olivia was truly trying to rebuild, or if she was simply running from the wreckage she had created. Jane pulled open her desk drawer and, without thinking, began to write. A letter. But this time, she didn't send it. It was too soon. The words she had written were almost identical to the ones she had sent before. Quiet, calculated, sharp. But this time, something was different. There was no rush to finish it, no urgency to hurt. For now, it was a letter to be kept in a drawer, a reminder of where they had both come from and how far they still had to go. In the end, Jane didn't send it. Not yet. But Olivia's world was still shifting. And Jane? She wasn't done with her daughter, not by a long shot. The silence between them had become a kind of weight, a tangible thing. Jane sat in her study, looking at her phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. Olivia had posted again. A single sentence, simple and raw. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it was an invitation. "I'm sorry." There were no grand gestures, no long-winded explanations or pleas for forgiveness. Just those two words, typed out in a raw moment of vulnerability, shared with the world. For the first time in a long time, Jane felt something stir within her. Something small, something fragile. She sat back in her chair, staring at the post for a long while, her thumb hovering over the screen. She had been prepared for anything: anger, excuses, more manipulation. But this quiet surrender was unexpected. The impulse to ignore it, to shut it out, was there. But Jane didn't. She pressed the like button. One single tap. It was an acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a sign that she saw Olivia, that she was still here, still watching. The weight of the gesture hung in the air. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Minutes passed, the tension thick in the room. Then, her phone buzzed again. A text message from Olivia. The words were simple. Coffee? For a moment, Jane's heart skipped. There had been no promises, no rehearsed lines. Just an open request, a tentative olive branch held out from the other side. Jane knew it was coming, this fragile attempt at reconciliation. She'd expected something like it. Eventually. The real question now was how to respond. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would shut Olivia down and send her retreating into her own silence once again. But she didn't. Instead, she simply typed, yes. The meeting was set, not with the weight of old grudges or unspoken promises, but with a new kind of quiet. It wasn't about closing wounds anymore. It was about seeing what could be built from the rubble. When Jane walked into the cafe, she saw Olivia sitting in the far corner, her back straight, but her face pale as if she was bracing for something. The seat across from her was empty. There was no rush, no attempt to fill the silence with pleasantries. Just the quiet hum of the cafe around them and the weight of years pressing in between the two of them. Olivia looked up when Jane approached, her eyes tired but open. She offered a small, uncertain smile as Jane slid into the seat across from her. There was no instant comfort, no immediate understanding between them. Only a fragile truce that neither of them knew how to navigate. Jane didn't speak first. She studied Olivia's face, searching for any signs of the woman she had once known, the woman who had been her daughter, the woman who had torn everything apart, the woman who had burned their bridge beyond recognition. Olivia finally spoke, her voice quieter than Jane had ever heard it before. I don't know where to start. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her on the table as if she could hold herself together that way. I don't even know who I am anymore. Jane's gaze softened, but she didn't respond. She wasn't ready for a flood of emotions or confessions that didn't feel earned. Instead, she let the silence settle between them, the only sound the clink of mugs and the murmur of conversations in the background. The air was heavy, thick with everything they had been through and everything that was still unsaid. Finally, Jane spoke, her voice steady but laced with a quiet bitterness. What made you think you could treat me like garbage and not pay for it? Olivia winced, her eyes flickering with shame. I was wrong, she whispered, her voice breaking as the weight of those words landed between them. I thought you were weak. I thought you would always just take it, the way you always did. The words stung, but Jane's face remained calm, her expression unreadable. She had spent so many years absorbing the pain, watching from the sidelines as Olivia took what she wanted without ever considering the cost. But now, in this fragile moment, she didn't know what to say. There was no victory to claim, no easy triumph in seeing Olivia broken. I wasn't weak, Jane said softly, her voice filled with a quiet authority. I let you take everything, but I won't do that anymore. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she looked up at her mother, her face still contorted with guilt. I'm sorry. I've never been sorry enough. Jane's gaze hardened, but her voice remained measured. Sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Olivia's eyes were cast downward, her face a mask of remorse, while Jane simply watched her, the silence between them feeling like an endless abyss. It was the silence of years lost, of damage done. Olivia finally broke the quiet, her voice barely a whisper. I can't undo what I did, I can't fix it. Jane nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth tight with an emotion she couldn't name. No, you can't. And you don't get to erase it. Another silence stretched, but this one felt different. It wasn't the heavy silence of conflict or bitterness, it was the quiet of understanding. Of acceptance, perhaps, but also of finality. Olivia wiped her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. I don't know where we go from here, but I don't want to go back to what we were. Jane's response was a quiet nod, her hands folded in front of her. Neither do I. The moment passed, and with it, some of the tension that had hung between them for so long began to lift. But the air between them was still fragile, like the first tentative steps of a person learning to walk again after a fall. They were no longer enemies, but they weren't yet friends. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and still marked with the scars of what had come before. But for the first time, they both saw that something could be built from what had been broken, and for now, that was enough. The small office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, an ordinary, forgettable scent in an ordinary, forgettable space. Olivia sat across from Jane, her posture straight but her hands trembling slightly in her lap. She had placed a folder in front of Jane, one that felt weighty despite the lightness of the paper it held. It was a quiet offering, a collection of fragments, receipts, therapy notes, business ideas for a charity that she had been quietly working on. Everything she had started, everything she had worked through in the last months was wrapped up in this folder. Olivia's efforts, her real, honest attempts to rebuild what had been lost, were now laid bare in front of Jane. There were no excuses left to make. No more half-hearted promises. Just raw, unvarnished truths. Jane opened the folder slowly, her eyes scanning the contents with an unreadable expression. There were receipts for therapy sessions, marked by dates that spanned months. She could see the progress, the slow unraveling of a woman who had once been so consumed by ego, by ambition, by a need to prove herself. There was something human in the way Olivia had kept track of her own journey, each entry in the folder a testament to the work she had been doing in the silence of her own life. Along with the receipts, there were notes on a new initiative: Mothers and Daughters, Rebuilding Bridges, a local charity designed to help families like hers, families broken by the weight of unspoken words and neglected relationships. The concept was simple but powerful. Create a space where estranged mothers and daughters could reconnect, where the wounds of the past could begin to heal. Olivia had found something meaningful to focus on, something bigger than herself. Jane could feel a flicker of something unfamiliar stir within her. It wasn't bitterness or anger, it was pride, quiet, hesitant pride. The kind of pride that one feels when they watch someone do the work, when they finally see the effort and the real change unfold before their eyes. She looked up at Olivia, who was waiting patiently, eyes full of something Jane couldn't place. Perhaps it was hope. But more than that, it was vulnerability. The kind that comes from being seen, truly seen, for who you are, without the armor of past mistakes or half-formed defenses. I've been working on this for a while, Olivia said quietly, as if she could hear Jane's thoughts, though she hadn't spoken them. It's not about fixing what we had. I know that can never happen. But I thought, maybe I can help other people who've been through what we went through. Jane didn't answer immediately. She sat back in her chair, folding her hands in front of her. There was a weight in the silence. But it wasn't the suffocating weight of the past. It was something different. Something new. Olivia, Jane said, her voice low but steady. You've made a lot of mistakes. You've hurt a lot of people, including me. She paused, allowing the words to settle between them. But you've also done something here that matters. Something that isn't just about you. That's the difference. Olivia looked down, her eyes flicking to the folder, as if she could sink into it and disappear. But she didn't. She was still there, still fighting for whatever was left. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm asking you to help me. With this work. I don't know how to do it alone." The words hung in the air between them. It was a simple request, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. The years of hurt, the anger, the fractured trust. And now, after everything, Olivia was asking Jane for something that didn't come easy. For help. Not forgiveness, not love, but the possibility of something that could stand, even if it wasn't perfect. Jane took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving Olivia's face. She saw the desperation there, the same desperation that had once twisted Olivia's heart into something unrecognizable. But now, there was something different. Something she hadn't seen in years. "You get one shot," Jane said, her voice soft but firm. "If you really want to do this, if you really want to change, then show me. Show me you can keep your word. Show me this isn't just another self-serving project. I've seen too many of those." Olivia nodded, her eyes filling with something like gratitude, though it was still tentative. The edges of her past weren't fully healed, but this moment, this fragile, uncertain start, was a step in the right direction. "Thank you," Olivia whispered. But Jane didn't respond. She didn't need to. The words were said, the offer given, and the decision made. The room was heavy with silence once again, but this time it wasn't the weight of the past pressing down on them. It was the quiet of a new beginning, of something that could grow, slowly, carefully, over time. As Jane closed the folder and pushed it back toward Olivia, she realized that she wasn't just looking at a woman who had made mistakes. She was looking at someone who was, finally, trying to make things right. And for the first time in a long time, Jane felt like there was something worth holding on to. The studio was small, but warm, with soft lights casting long shadows across the walls. Olivia sat across from Jane, a microphone between them, its presence almost too intimate. The air was thick with the weight of the conversation about to unfold. Raw, unfiltered. They were about to share a part of themselves with the world. Not as mother and daughter, but as two women who had been through the fire and lived to tell the tale. Olivia's hands were steady now, though her fingers still betrayed her with small tremors. She glanced at Jane, who was already looking at her, the same calm demeanor that had gotten them through countless moments like this. Jane had agreed to this. She had agreed to let their story be told in a way they had never done before. The host, a woman in her 30s with a welcoming smile, introduced them with a brief nod. She could sense the tension, the vulnerability that was hanging in the air, but she had no idea what was coming. "We're going to talk about something many of us don't want to face," the host said, settling into her seat. "Revenge, accountability, and the wounds that divide families." The words hung between them, too simple, too small to capture the gravity of the conversation. Jane took a breath, her eyes never leaving the host. Olivia did the same, her gaze meeting Jane's for the briefest moment before turning back to the microphone. The first question came, a gentle poke into the chasm of their shared history. "What does accountability mean to you both, after everything that's happened?" Jane spoke first, her voice steady but carrying the weight of years. "Accountability means facing the truth, even when it's inconvenient. It means acknowledging the damage that's been done, not just to yourself, but to the people around you." Olivia's voice came next, softer but no less powerful. "I thought accountability was just about saying sorry, but I've learned it's about more than that. It's about doing the work. It's about changing what's broken, even when you can't fix everything." There was a long pause as the words hung in the air, settling around them like dust. For the first time, Olivia felt like she was speaking truth. Not an apology wrapped in excuses, but something raw, something real. The host nodded, her face pensive. And what about revenge? It's part of this journey, isn't it? At that, Jane's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. Revenge is a trap. It feels like power for a moment, but it doesn't fix anything. It just keeps you stuck, replaying old wounds, never letting them heal. Olivia's eyes dropped to the table. I spent so long focused on revenge, thinking it would make me feel better. But the truth is, it just made me feel smaller. Every time I tried to hurt someone back, I only hurt myself. Their conversation flowed, deepening with each passing minute. It was a catharsis, a release, and yet, the deeper they went, the more real it became. They weren't just talking about their own wounds anymore. They were talking about family, about love, and about the ways we wound each other without ever realizing it. When the host finally asked the question that seemed to linger on the tip of every listener's tongue, Jane's answer was the one that would be remembered. "How do you reconcile the irreconcilable?" she asked, turning to both women. Jane's eyes softened, her voice strong but gentle. "You don't. Not completely. But you can choose to stop the cycle. You can choose to acknowledge the pain, to sit with it, to let it be a part of who you are without letting it define you." Olivia nodded, her gaze unwavering. "It's a decision every day. To forgive, even if it doesn't feel fair. To move forward, even if it's terrifying. But that's where the healing is." As the interview ended, they both felt lighter, though the weight of the conversation had not disappeared. But now, it was different. The world had heard them, and they had shared something real, something messy and beautiful. They had reclaimed their narrative, not as victims of each other's actions, but as women who had chosen to walk forward, together. The podcast episode went live that evening, and within hours, the response was overwhelming. The downloads surged, the shares skyrocketed, the comments poured in, some supportive, some hateful, some raw with emotion. But the overwhelming theme was one of recognition. "I never thought I could forgive my mother. But listening to this, maybe there's hope. It's hard to admit, but I've been in Olivia's shoes, and I can't ignore the truth anymore." The words were mixed. Some listeners were angry, refusing to forgive. Others were moved, unable to shake the vulnerability in Jane and Olivia's voices. The emotional honesty cut through everything, leaving behind an undeniable truth. Reconciliation wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean, but it was possible. In the days that followed, Jane and Olivia were invited to speak at women's centers, schools, and private events. They spoke of the complexity of family, the difficulty of facing your own mistakes, and the fragile nature of forgiveness. Their story became a framework for complex reconciliation, a guide for those caught in the web of anger and regret. But as the applause faded, Jane knew there was still a long road ahead. Their story had resonated with so many, but it wasn't over. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that she wasn't just helping others anymore. She was helping herself too. When the last event ended and the crowds had dispersed, Jane turned to Olivia. "Are you ready to keep going?" she asked, her voice quiet but strong. Olivia looked at her, a soft smile on her face. "Every day. With you." The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like they were walking it together. It started with a notification, a ping that broke the fragile calm Olivia had been building, one that sent a chill down her spine. She had been reading through some new project proposals when the news alert flashed across her phone. Controversial video resurfaces. Olivia Parker's past caught on tape. Her pulse quickened, and she opened the link, her stomach dropping as the video began to play. It was an old clip from a corporate event years ago, back when Olivia was still climbing, still fighting, still playing the game with fire and arrogance. In the video, she was laughing with colleagues, smugly dismissing the concerns of a subordinate in a way that now felt like a distant, unrecognizable version of herself. The way she'd spoken, the arrogance in her tone. It was the same Olivia, but not. The video went viral within hours. Old clips, new commentary, and harsh judgment piled up, each more unforgiving than the last. The comments section on the video was a battlefield. Some people defended her, while others condemned her as the real Olivia. The backlash was immediate. Olivia knew it was coming, but that didn't stop the sting. The same people who had applauded her success now turned on her with venom, accusing her of being manipulative, cold, a fraud. A few high-profile sponsors pulled their support, citing the resurfacing video as evidence of her true nature. The media, always hungry for a story, grasped onto the narrative, framing her as someone incapable of real change. Jane felt the anger build in her chest as she scrolled through the messages, the comments, the articles. How dare they? How dare they bring up the past when Olivia was fighting every day to rebuild? The same people who had once celebrated her downfall were now quick to judge her progress, eager to pull her down again. For a moment, she almost called Rachel. She wanted to share her fury, to tell someone who understood. But she knew better. Rachel had always seen Olivia as a symbol of failure. She had never believed in second chances. And Jane knew, deep down, Rachel would only fuel her anger, only urge her to fight back with venom, to make Olivia's enemies feel the weight of their judgment. Instead, Jane took a deep breath, put down the phone, and called Olivia. "Mom!" Olivia's voice was raw, trembling. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. This video—" "Olivia," Jane interrupted, her voice a firm anchor in the storm. "You don't need to apologize to me. You've worked harder than anyone I know to change. What they're doing is just noise." "I don't know how to handle this," Olivia said quietly. "I can't go back to the person I was, but they're trying to drag me back there. I don't know how to fix this." Jane closed her eyes for a moment, her hand gripping the phone tighter. "You don't fix this by running away from it. You face it. You own it. You show them the truth of who you are now." Olivia hesitated, then said, "But what if they never believe me? What if this is all anyone ever sees of me?" "Then make them see something else," Jane replied. "Make them see the woman you are today, not the one they want to keep trapped in their memory." Olivia was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "Thank you." The next day, Olivia posted a video of her own addressing the backlash directly. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to deflect blame. She spoke honestly, vulnerably, admitting that the person in that video was her, but it wasn't who she was anymore. She owned the arrogance, the mistakes, and the cruelty, and she apologized for everything. "I've spent years trying to outrun who I was, trying to bury it so no one would see it," Olivia said into the camera, her voice steady despite the vulnerability. "But running only makes you weaker. So here's the truth. That person in that video? She's still me, but she's not who I am now. I've changed. And I will keep changing. Not for you, but for me." The response was mixed. The trolls and the critics came out in full force, mocking her for trying to save face. But there were others, those who saw the rawness in her words, the courage in her honesty. They praised her for confronting the past and moving forward. Jane watched the video, her heart tight. She was proud of Olivia, proud in a way she hadn't been before. Olivia had faced the music, and though the world may not forgive her, she had reclaimed her agency. She wasn't hiding anymore. Later that night, Rachel called, her voice icy. "I saw the video," she said, No greeting. You're really going to support her after all this? Jane didn't hesitate. Yes, I'm supporting her. She's my daughter, Rachel. She's doing the work. That's what matters. There was a long silence on the other end before Rachel's voice finally broke through. You're making a mistake, Jane. She's still the same person. You just don't want to see it. Jane's eyes closed. She knew what Rachel was saying. She had always known what Rachel thought. But this time, it didn't matter. I'm not making a mistake, Jane replied, her voice steady. I'm choosing to believe in her. I'm choosing to believe that she can change, because I've seen it. And you can either accept that, or you can walk away. I won't choose vengeance anymore. Not for her. Not for anyone. The line went silent, and for the first time in a long while, Jane felt the weight of Rachel's disapproval slide off her shoulders. As Jane hung up, she looked at Olivia's video again. This time, it didn't matter who had seen it, or who would judge her. It was Olivia's truth now, and the world was going to have to see it. But what Jane understood most was that her bond with Olivia was no longer conditional. This was the beginning of something real, a mother choosing to stand with her daughter. Not because she was perfect, but because she was trying. And that was enough. It came in waves, the storm that Jane had never seen coming. Her phone buzzed incessantly, the notifications blurring into one long line of chaos. Her reputation, once carefully constructed, now crumbling beneath her, was being dismantled piece by piece, and the culprit was someone she had trusted most, Rachel. Her old friend, her ally, had been feeding information to the media, leaked details of Jane's past, the deals she had made, the mistakes she had tried to bury. Private conversations, embarrassing moments, all of it laid bare for the public to devour. The accusations were subtle but deadly, insinuating that Jane had been less the victim than she'd led everyone to believe. It wasn't just the past she had to deal with now. Rachel was painting Jane as a manipulator, a woman who had lied and used Olivia as a pawn in her own games. The narrative was spinning out of control, and Jane felt herself losing her grip on the truth. The calls came in nonstop. Sponsors pulled out of her initiatives. Former colleagues distanced themselves, their once constant praise now replaced with cool silence. Jane's name was once again dragged through the mud. The world was watching her fall, but this time it wasn't the scandalous leaks or public betrayals that haunted her. It was the betrayal from the one person who should have had her back. Olivia, however, was standing firm. She had seen it all, and this time, there was no hesitation in her stance. She had spent too long hiding behind the shadows of others' opinions, but now she was willing to fight, not for herself, but for her mother. She wasn't going to let Rachel dictate the narrative anymore. As the media storm raged on, Olivia reached out to Jane. "We're going to face this head-on," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm standing by you. This time, you're not alone." Jane looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Olivia, the same woman who had once turned against her, was now her fiercest ally. The weight of that support was enough to stir something inside Jane, something she hadn't felt in years: confidence, unity, the knowledge that they had made it this far, and they would make it through this too. It was a decision that would define everything. Olivia arranged a meeting with Rachel, determined to face the storm head-on. She didn't want to just survive the fallout. She wanted to reclaim the truth, to protect her mother and their future. The confrontation happened in front of a crowd at a media event. The tension in the air was palpable as Olivia stepped up to the stage, her gaze fixed firmly on Rachel, who was sitting in the front row. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, and the buzz in the room grew louder, charged with anticipation. "I'm not here to apologize," Olivia began, her voice cutting through the noise. "But I am here to speak the truth." Rachel, I know you've been feeding the press stories about my mother. You've been telling lies about her, about me. But what you haven't realized is that we've both grown, and we're done letting you define us. Rachel's expression was unreadable as Olivia stepped forward, the distance between them shrinking with every word. You've been using my mistakes against us, twisting everything into something we're not, but I won't let you use me to hurt her anymore. This stops now. The room went silent, the weight of Olivia's words sinking in. The confrontation was like a slow burn, a confrontation of everything they had been through. Rachel, taken aback by the public nature of the attack, stood slowly, her eyes flicking nervously toward the crowd. You think you can just make this all go away? Rachel's voice shook with anger. You've always been your mother's puppet. Olivia's gaze hardened. Not anymore. I've learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and I won't let you destroy the one person who stood by me through everything. The room held its breath, the silence broken only by the distant click of a camera. The exchange was a public reckoning, one that tore at the seams of their old friendship. Rachel tried to counter, but Olivia's words had already sunk in, leaving a bitter taste in the air. The confrontation went viral within minutes. News outlets buzzed with shock, social media exploded with reactions, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jane and Olivia were finally united. No longer torn apart by the past, no longer fragmented by others' opinions. They stood together, stronger than they ever had before. Later that night, as the weight of the day's events settled, Jane and Olivia sat together in silence. The storm wasn't over, but something had shifted. The bond between them, once tentative and frail, had become something unshakable. They had faced the chaos, not as enemies, but as allies. I never thought I'd see you stand up to Rachel like that, Jane said, her voice thick with emotion. You are incredible. Olivia smiled, a soft, genuine curve of her lips. I had to. This time, it's not just about her or you, it's about us, together. Jane nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet, unspoken understanding. We're not perfect, but we've learned, and that's enough. The storm was far from over. They both knew that. But in this moment, surrounded by the aftermath, they had reclaimed their narrative. And this time, it was theirs to tell. As the world outside continued to judge and critique, Jane and Olivia sat side by side, knowing that their second rebirth had begun. It wasn't a clean slate, it wasn't an easy road, but it was theirs, and together, they would face whatever came next. The book was finished. Jane sat at the table, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the final printed copy. Trash, a memoir of reclamation, emblazoned in bold letters on the cover. A title so simple, so raw, and yet it carried everything they had been through. Every wound, every battle, every moment of silence and screaming. It was their truth, finally laid bare for the world to see. Olivia sat across from her, her expression unreadable at first, but then a faint smile tugged at her lips. We did it, she said, her voice steady but filled with something that felt like wonder. She picked up the book, running her fingers over the smooth cover. I didn't think we'd ever get here. Jane's eyes softened as she looked at Olivia. The woman who had once thrown her things out into the yard, called them trash, now sitting beside her, holding their story. This wasn't just a book. It was the culmination of everything they had been through, everything they had rebuilt. I didn't either, Jane admitted, the weight of her words heavy in the air. But here we are. The memoir, written together, had become a bestseller almost overnight. The raw honesty, the pain, and the courage to face the truth resonated with millions. Readers from all walks of life connected with their story of estranged families, betrayal, and the long, hard road to healing. It wasn't just about them, it was about everyone who had ever felt broken, discarded, or lost. They had turned their personal pain into something that could help others, something meaningful, something that couldn't be erased or forgotten. The success of the book, though, was only the beginning. In the months that followed, Olivia launched the Rebuild Foundation, a charity focused on helping people recover from family trauma. It wasn't just a passive outreach, it was a call to action. Olivia poured herself into the foundation, traveling to support groups, offering workshops, and creating a space for mothers and daughters to reconnect. She was finally taking the lessons she'd learned and giving them to others. At the same time, Jane made a quiet but resolute decision. She retired from the public eye. She no longer needed to be in the spotlight. Her legacy wasn't about speaking at conferences or appearing on talk shows. It was about the work she'd done, the family she'd helped rebuild, and the life she'd now chosen to live on her own terms. She had fought, endured, and survived. She had nothing left to prove. And yet, her name lived on, not just in the words of the memoir, but in the foundation that Olivia had built. Jane had helped start it, had been the quiet force behind its creation, but now it was Olivia's turn to carry the mantle. They both knew that. Months later, after the last of the press events had quieted and the initial flood of excitement had died down, they stood in front of the house. The house. Jane's old house. The one she had thought was gone, discarded like everything else. The one that had been sold years ago after the fallout. The one that had been a symbol of all the things that had broken them. But now, they were back. Olivia had insisted. They'd bought it back. Piece by piece, they had worked to make it their own again, restoring it to what it once was. And in some ways, even better, it was symbolic, this act of rebuilding. They weren't just fixing a house. They were fixing what had been broken inside them. Room by room, they rebuilt the walls, the foundation, the memories. They had learned to live with the past and build something new on top of it. Jane and Olivia stood side by side on the front steps, looking at the house. The yard was still there, the one that had once been the site of so much pain, where Jane's things had been thrown and discarded, labeled as trash. Now, it was just a yard, a place where they had both started to grow again. Jane turned to Olivia, her voice soft, filled with a kind of peaceful finality. I never thought I'd see the day when we would stand here together. After everything we've been through, I thought it was impossible. Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with a mixture of pride and relief. I didn't think I'd be able to come back either. But we did. And we're here. Together. Jane's lips twitched upward in the faintest of smiles. We were never trash, were we? Olivia's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long time, Jane saw the daughter she had always hoped for, strong, resilient, and unafraid to stand beside her. No, we weren't, Olivia replied quietly, her voice carrying a strength that Jane hadn't heard in years. The moment held. The weight of the past was still there, but now it was different. It didn't hold them back anymore. They didn't need to fix everything, to erase the mistakes or the hurt. What mattered now was that they had chosen to move forward, not as victims or enemies, but as two women who refused to stay broken. They stood together in the yard, side by side, a quiet testament to the strength it had taken to get there. And Jane knew, without a doubt, that they had rebuilt more than just a house. They had rebuilt their lives, together. The final line echoed in Jane's mind, the words she had written with Olivia, the words that had captured everything they had learned, everything they had fought for. This isn't trash. This is who we became when we refused to stay broken. It was their story, and it was theirs to tell.